Again, welcome. My name is Dakota Schultz. I am the Executive Director of the Chicago chapter of A&A Business Marketing. A lot of you still probably know us as the Business Marketing Association, which is just fine as well. We will answer to anything in that regard. For today, please, as always, feel free to submit questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, applause, and all that good stuff into the chat. We'll facilitate fielding those questions and getting them to Richard and to Roland towards the end of the presentation today. As a way of some housekeeping events, and I previewed it a little bit with saying that we have some in-person opportunities coming up. I want to invite everybody to join us for tacos, beer, and the company of your fellow marketers. I don't know what else you would need beyond that on April 20th from 5 to 7 p.m. at Cruz Blanca Brewery in the West Loop. I want to give a huge shout out to George Graffiti, who I think is like, you know, the crown prince of the BMA in a lot of ways, for helping me put the event together and for being willing to sponsor it too, with his agency, Tell Your Story. So if you know George, send him a note, send him a message on LinkedIn, a text, anything, telling him thanks, and that you'll see him and us on April 20th. You can get your tickets at chicagobusinessmarketing.net. I'll also drop a direct link to Eventbrite into the chat a little bit later. So for today, I'm super excited about our topic, and it couldn't, I don't think, be more relevant. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a disclaimer, actually, which is a personal bias that I have that maybe many of you do too. So I tend to feel like marketers are uniquely positioned to see trends, to synthesize ideas into opportunities, and then to tell the story of how and why to make all of that happen, whatever it is that we are seeing. And so today, obviously, the talent market is unlike anything that any of us have experienced, certainly in a long time. So what does that mean? How can marketers be change agents really in this opportunity right now? Whether you call it the great resignation, the great exploration, I think there's lots of ways to look at the moment that we're in from a talent standpoint and figure out what those opportunities and challenges are. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's what our board of volunteers who put all this together have been facing as well. This is something that is squarely on our desks, in our laps. We are all hiring marketers to our own teams. We are also in the midst of our own career changes. We are serving clients that have changing talent needs too. And that's for all businesses, all sizes, all industries. So this is sitting with us, and we know that it's sitting with a lot of you too, as far as what you have going on in your own careers and businesses. So being as excited as I am to have Richard join us today, I also am equally excited to have my good friend Roland Jacobs lead this discussion. Roland is himself, I think, an exceptional and innovative marketer. He's a 3-time CMO. He developed a really revolutionary Orbitz travel brand. He's also founded and runs his own consultancy, AspireUp, that builds teams that are top-tier talent specific to the needs of his clients, which I think is kind of apropos for today too. Those clients include Microsoft, Wells Fargo, ITW, and many more. He's, and maybe most importantly here, I think, an incredible connector. He's always introducing people and businesses to good opportunities, which in some ways is what this is all about too. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Roland, and take us away for today.
Well, thank you very much, Dakota. It's so great to see so many people that I've seen even recently in the last month, and also a bunch of people here I haven't seen in a few years. So it's great to have this group of marketers together again, and particularly as we think about how long it's been since we've all been together in person. We are having events coming around the corner, as Dakota said, so I'm hoping many of you can turn out to some of those in-person events. I think we're all sort of feeling cooped up. But as we go back to not too long ago, about 2 years ago, you may recall we first went into the COVID lockdown. Do you remember that? It seemed at that time like the world would end. Everyone was worried about losing their jobs, whether their company would survive, how they're going to manage their career. Well, how things have changed dramatically, not for everybody, but for the majority of the marketing profession. in the sense that we're hearing now that post-COVID, if we can say that, hopefully, there's now a war for talent. There's the great resignation that they say is causing a shortage of talent. It seems that the odds have never been so stacked in favor of employees, but not everyone is benefiting. We'll talk about that. But at the same time, it's become a major challenge for employers to recruit and retain talent. So whether you're a CMO on the call here or early in your career as a marketer, these shifts underway will definitely impact your career, and you have a chance to influence that. So we'll dig into some of those shifts. And when I thought about who would be best to share observations and advice on this topic, the person who first jumped to my mind is Richard Sanderson of Spencer Stuart. Say hello, Richard. He is the leading, Spencer Stuart is the leading executive search firm globally. And Richard is perhaps the top executive recruiter in North America for senior marketing, sales, and communications executives. He leads that practice in North America. And if he's the leader in North America, I wonder is maybe he's the leader in the world, because North America is the biggest market. So, and we're honored to have Richard. I've known him for a decade or more. And Richard, I'm going to start by quoting a couple of articles. I jumped on Google to see what's in the press these days about this war for talent. And I want to share a couple of the headlines that popped up. One of them from Marketing Week from a few months ago. It said, marketing salaries jump by as much as 50% as the job market bounces back. A Forbes article says, marketers are resigning en masse. Apparently many are looking to go freelance or earn more money. The article goes on to say, many social media marketers are now accepting jobs in Silicon Valley at a $250,000 annual salary. Just recently, it was reported that some CMOs are making upwards to $15 million. Now, we know those are exceptions, I'm sure. It would be shocking if anyone on this call fit into those categories, but this is happening around the country. One executive recruiter said in that Marketing Week article, employers are really trying to retain top talent because it's a massive cost and disaster if your star performer leaves. He said it's gotten quite silly in terms of how many people are getting paid to stay doing their current job. Many executive search agencies and recruiters are juggling more roles than candidates. So turning to you, Richard, it seems that employees have more leverage than ever. Is that true at all? And what are you seeing?
Well, Roland, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and your sort of effusive introduction was very kind. So I do appreciate it. So you brought up a lot of topics to talk about, everything from the Great Resignation through what's going on with compensation trends and general movement in the market. So there's a lot to potentially unpack there. So why don't I just take a run at the sort of the topic of the Great Resignation, because I know that's been a phrase now that's being thrown around for a couple of years, and so what really is going on in the market right now? I think others have framed it this way as well. I see it not so much as a Great Resignation, but rather a great reshuffle. We're seeing switching and changing, not necessarily withdrawal altogether from the labor market. At the most macro level, and I think the latest Labor Department statistics came out this week. I mean, the reality is, when you look at the numbers now, employment levels are back where we were pre-pandemic. So it's just not true that people are just withdrawing themselves from the workforce. We are back to where we were. The difference, though, is that the composition, I think, of the labor market looks quite different. The argument has been that workforce participation rates have declined, but as I mentioned, I think the latest data shows that isn't true. There was actually a fascinating article, it was in the New York Times this morning. Paul Krugman, one of the an economist, wrote this article, and he sort of recast it a different way. So here's what's really going on when you look at the data. There's sort of two big trends that he identifies. Number one is a lot more people now are self-employed. I think he puts the number somewhere around 600,000 people have essentially shifted their status from being employees to self-employed. Now, some of that is, the rise of the gig economy, but some of it is people are just choosing to branch out on their own, more entrepreneurial, and people are just choosing to be self-employed rather than employed by others. The other bit, and perhaps this is a little bit more controversial, there's just been a notable decline in immigration, and that's had a big impact on the available talent pool. Whatever you believe, in my opinion, the overall impact is the same, which is, and you sort of put it this way a little bit, Roland, demand for labor right now is greater than supply. And you know, simply what that means is companies are chasing fewer people, there's volatility, there's job shifting. As we all know, when demand is greater than supply, price goes up. In this case, price are wages, and that has led to a quote unquote war for talent. It is true that we are spending a lot of time with our clients talking about retention just as much as recruitment. We try and position ourselves as advisors. And yes, of course, whilst we'd love to do search work, I think there is a real issue now around retention. However, those are, if you like, Roland, some of the macro trends. When you think about, so what does this mean at a more micro level, and what does it mean for marketers? So for this crowd more specifically, I think this great reshuffle has really affected, I think, different segments of the market very differently. What I have seen, and in certain private conversations I've had, I would say my observation has been for those that are more mid or especially later career, the reality is the pandemic has been very kind. And what I mean by that is, you know, just look at the stock market. You know, after the initial dip, share prices have rocketed up. I think the Dow Jones dipped somewhere, I think it was below 20,000 in March, right after the pandemic hit. You know, then it soared up to something like 36,000 at the end of last year. I realize it's come down a little bit. If you're in the tech market, you actually experienced unprecedented wealth creation. The NASDAQ went below 7,000, I think, around the time of the pandemic, and it hit 16,000 by Thanksgiving last year. It more than doubled in the space of a year and a half. I don't think we've seen that level of potential wealth creation. The reality is, for some people, their 401ks were flush, their equity holdings were doing extremely well, and we did observe a small number of people get out. They did retire early because they could, and some of our search work over the last year has been driven by early, retirements or exits or people choosing to get out. But I would say that's the minority. What I think is actually happening, though, for those that are more early and mid-career, it was a very different experience. I think this pandemic, this last 2 years, has actually been deeply traumatic for a lot of people. For younger folks in particular, I saw this on some of our teams. It often meant people were moving back with their parents. They were leaving big cities. There was a huge amount of uncertainty in people's personal and professional lives, and we saw a lot higher turnover in that cohort. I think the experience of work was very different and frankly quite unfulfilling for some people earlier in their career. I mean, they didn't get the experience of working for someone or with someone. I think there was very little coaching going on, very little mentoring going on, very little development going on in a Zoom setting. And what we saw was, frankly, people leaving mediocre jobs with poor company cultures. We saw a lot of that. Going on. When I think specifically what it's meant for marketing leaders and some of the trends that we've seen over the last 2 years, and sort of, if I can put it this way, what's hot and what's not right now for marketing leaders as we've gone through the pandemic, there's a few things. The overarching theme, I think, that unites everything I'm about to say, it's really around digital acceleration. There have been pronounced shifts, and I'm sure many people on this call have seen it themselves, in consumer behavior and expectation, and even in industries and segments that were historically viewed as perhaps digital laggards. And I don't mean to pick on certain industries, but for example, healthcare provision was often seen as a little bit slower in terms of adoption of digital experiences. But even the patient-doctor experience, the most sacrosanct of all, that was always done in the confines of four walls, even that went digital. I even know one person that got a diagnosis of cancer via push notification on an app. I mean, it was not a great experience, but this is what had happened over the last 2 years. So now, what does that mean for marketing leadership? We have seen some really interesting spikes in demand around certain areas of marketing leadership. I would say early on, the first spike we saw was for brand leaders. This was an interesting opportunity for some brands to reset. Yeah. Brand loyalty, I think, in many cases became tested, and I think there was a McKinsey report that showed there was unprecedented levels of brand switching going on. And we'd seen a number of searches for, VPs, SVPs of brand. Then the next wave, I think we saw a big spike in CX, so customer experience leaders.
Yeah.
Big changes in customer behavior taking place. And if you think about what CX is, it's really the delivery of the brand promise. Most customer journeys went omni-channel. How people were shopping, buying had changed. The big trends around disintermediation, and we've seen and still experiencing a big wave in demand for customer experience leaders. And then I think what we're seeing another wave of right now, and I thought we'd put this one to bed a little bit 5 years ago, but the return of the chief digital officer. It's back. I mean, this role was super popular, I think, around 2015, 2016. We're seeing a resurgence now, and it's really what it really is a demand for digital transformation leaders. And we're seeing it, and perhaps more relevant for this crowd, particularly in B2B.
Yeah.
So much more of the purchase journey has gone online. It's multi-channel. Legacy field sales teams were disadvantaged during the pandemic, and hence, I know we titled this presentation today, Roland, the golden era of marketing. And I say that because I think it's never been a greater time for marketing leaders to influence the sales cycle. And I've always felt the closer a marketing leader is to influencing revenue, the better. So look, I could go on and on.
Yeah,
There's
right.
Macro trends, micro trends, and then I think what we're seeing right now in terms of what's hot and what's not for marketing leadership.
And Richard, that's interesting, and exactly what I'm seeing with my clients and a lot of my contacts out there, that CX is hot, digital leadership is again hot. The demands on senior marketers are greater than ever in terms of cross-functional coordination, their ability to make more complex tasks happen. We'll come back to that in a moment. But, you talked about sort of winners and losers. Anytime there's dislocation in an economy and business, you see that. And, many of you on the call may be not so much on the winning side and wondering what's up with that. We'll address with Richard giving some advice to those of you who may feel you're not on the winning side. In the chat, Kristen put out there that she doesn't feel cultures have really changed or adjusted to that. Employers seem to still lack empathy. So let's shift to that, thinking about from an employer standpoint, recruiting and retaining talent. It seems that employee demands are changing. When I graduated from Harvard Business School, I just wanted to work for a great company, and companies focused on offering a respected brand, a career path, and training. And now it seems a lot more complicated for employers. For example, corporate values seem more important than ever to employees. Everyone wants to know what their company stands for. And it gets tricky because companies now have to sometimes decide to communicate values in an activist society. And there's more polarization than ever. So what would be your advice, Richard, to the employer side? They're your clients, and particularly to marketing leaders of companies who want to attract top talent. What do they need to do to attract top talent today?
Yep. Okay. So
and should they be strongly communicating their values? I'll tack on.
Well, so this is a really profound question, actually, because to me, one of the biggest changes in the last, let's say, 5 years is how companies are positioning themselves, their value proposition, their employee value proposition, and the critical role that marketing and communications leaders play in that. And what it strikes me as now, at its most basic level, if as a company, particularly a more consumer-orientated company, if you're not seen as for something, then the risk is you're perceived as against something. And increasingly, the days of companies, particularly those with large, valuable brands, just sort of sitting on the sidelines, have gone. I mean, just in the news now, Disney is being dragged through the mud by its own employees for for sitting on the sidelines related to a bill that's going through the Florida legislature. Netflix, when they had the Dave Chappelle, there was this incident with the Dave Chappelle, that was a few months ago. And for the first time, what we've seen is this wave of very real pressure bubbling up from within companies. It used to be forces outside of companies. Now the big shift is it's actually the employee base within the companies that are often now the single biggest change agent on how a company positions itself and how its brand is perceived and what its employee value proposition or its talent brand is seen as. And so, I think, what matters now to the next generation is very different to perhaps when you started your career, Roland. And, I'm 45 years old, but now I feel completely detached from what a 25-year-old may want from their work, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But we are seeing a lot more activism in workforces. I mean, when I think about, so what was the moment that really triggered this? I mean, to me, the seminal moment was actually, I think it was Nike's embrace of Colin Kaepernick. And if you remember this whole, taking the episode and so on, I mean, that took place actually back in 2016. I mean, this was 6 years ago when this first started happening, and well before, of course, we've had the George Floyd murder and lots of other very important social events as well. But at the time, Nike was perceived as taking a huge risk by embracing Colin Kaepernick. There was the risk of course, they're going to alienate the NFL. But the fact is, it's kind of what their consumers wanted, it's what their employees wanted, and it actually made business sense for them as well. But the point you're making is a really interesting one, which is, are we entering an era of the polarization of brands? And what does that mean? And I do think you are seeing a little bit of that, and you're almost seeing certain counter brands spring up. I mean, take the instance of, for example, Starbucks. Now you've got Black Rifle Coffee Company, all standing for very different things. I mean, are we actually falling into our brands becoming statements of political affiliation? And if so, what does that mean for the talent brand? What does it mean for the employee value proposition? And how do you attract people to your brand and to your business? And that's where I think the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, plays a really important role. I mean, I've seen in many businesses, Chief Marketing Officers are almost becoming sort of the recruiters in chief.
Yeah, I mean, that is just causes CMOs to pull their hair out, having to respond to all of those minefields that exist out there. When I was CMO of Orbitz, and by the way, recruited by Spencer Stuart, thank you, Richard, we were a very hot startup. My main focus was to build a unique and new brand in the online travel space and drive transactions so we could build scale quickly. I didn't get involved in the company's recruiting as an employer brand. We were in the news all the time, so we could just focus on hiring the best and brightest, and great candidates were lining up at the door. But speak to that. How has the role of the marketing leader changed within the company as far as recruiting, and what aspects of the head marketer job have changed other than that in the last decade or so?
Well, and not even the last decade, just in the last even just 2 or 3 years. I mean, I've seen this concept of chief marketing officers almost becoming the chief impact officer, if I can put it that way. I think I saw some fascinating data. If any of you follow Edelman, they put out a trust barometer each year. And here's what we're seeing in society. I mean, trust in government and institutions is at an all-time low. Conversely, though, businesses are seen as the problem solvers. They are actually, for many people, the most trusted institution by many people is actually their own employer. Increasingly, majority of people are buying brands based on trust and their perception of brands, and shoppers, employees, all stakeholders expect their either chief executive officers as the most visible role, but also the chief marketing officers as the embodiment of the brand, to have a view on inequality, to have a view on global warming. Indeed, I think there is an expectation that the businesses do more, and they are the primary problem solvers now in some aspects of society, or at least this is what the data from Edelman is showing. So this is a sort of a unique, unprecedented opportunity for businesses and marketing leaders to truly be seen as a positively impactful force in our society. Now, I don't quite know, I don't have the prescription on how marketers should grasp that, but rather to point out that this is a unique and unrivaled moment for marketing leaders and for businesses to establish and embrace purpose. And it looks like both stakeholders and employees are looking to businesses and their leaders to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like the CEO for sure, and even the marketing leader need to embody the brand of the company and be that credible force, so that people will personally identify to the values of the company and then therefore want to retain. I think people tend to leave companies less for pay and more because of misalignment with the values or feeling appreciated. I see nodding heads there. And, I know that's what I experienced back when I was in my corporate life. People want to be accepted and valued in their jobs. So the leaders of the company and the function need to really embody what's valued.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So, let's shift. You've got some practical advice, I know, for marketers. We'll start with sort of top of the house, the senior marketers, and then we'll shift to mid-career and junior folks. But, everyone wants to maximize their career success. You probably recruit more high-profile marketers than anyone in the industry, and you've seen lots of career paths that candidates have taken, some successful, some not so much. Well, let's talk about the senior folks. Based on the surveys you conduct every year, the CMO still has a tenure of only 3.5 years, which is probably the shortest. I don't know this, but maybe the shortest of any C-level position. Many people, including me, feel CMO should be, that CMO path should be a primrose path to the CEO spot. After all, CMOs are in the position to understand market growth opportunity, customer insights, drive strategy and execution, capture and retain business. So isn't that what business is about? Innovation, I could throw in there, but that's not a well-worn path. Why do you see such high turnover, and what's the gap CMOs need to fill today to have lasting impact?
Yeah. My starting point on this, Roland, is just to acknowledge that I think being a chief marketing officer is an incredibly hard job. I am perhaps fortunate to be an observer of chief marketing officers rather than actually be one. You've been one yourself, as Dakota said, 3 times. So why is it? Why is turnover so high? Why is it so hard? I think about this a lot. I mean, there's so many reasons that go into it. I mean, first of all, the definition of what a chief marketing officer does is completely inconsistent. The definition of what a CMO does, even within the same category, within the same industry, I have yet to see 2 job descriptions that are the same. So there's no consistency around what a CMO is or should be doing. I compare and contrast it to my colleagues, for example, who are recruiting chief financial officers. 80% of what a CFO does across companies is basically the same. I mean, they have similar org charts. They nearly always report to a CEO. They have a certain interface with the board. They always have a head of treasury, tax, audit, FP&A reporting to them. There's a lot of consistency. I do not see that in marketing. So number one, we have to accept that it is a wildly inconsistently defined role. I think the metrics of success are highly ambiguous. We nearly always ask when we're kicking off a search and writing a job spec, what does success look like at the end of this person's first year? And I can actually see sometimes, and I mean this in the nicest way, but I can sometimes see my clients like fumbling to come up with a good answer. I mean, they're just trying to pin down what is success is tough. I think being a marketing leader, particularly in the C-suite, it's the one job that everyone else thinks they can do, and unquestionably has an opinion on what you are doing. And then the reality is, as the scope of the role has just exploded over the last year. I mean, the modern chief marketing officer is now expected to be everything from a brand visionary, a creative genius, product marketing expert, a guru on data science, marketing technology, lifecycle marketing. I mean, everything. I mean, throw the kitchen sink in there. And now a chief marketing officer is expected to be all of that. And the reality is, we find very, very few people who can truly do it all. At the end of the day, though, if I had to pin down one thing around why there's more turnover, more than anything, when our clients or the CEO or the chief HR officer calls us in, the story that we hear quite consistently is there is a misalignment between what a CEO wants and what the chief marketing officer is actually delivering on. And so, if there's sort of advice, it's always think with that commercial focus. What actually delivers results for businesses? What actions are driving earnings per share, or whatever the metric is that the C-suite is bonused on, or what the board of directors is asking for. Don't get too caught up in metrics that don't matter to CFOs or CEOs. I don't think they really care about impressions or eyeballs or any of that kind of stuff. They care about revenue and profit. So that's the more for the CMO or the aspiring CMO. Then there's the more sort of early mid-career. And how do we help those folks be successful in the next generation of marketing leaders, Roland. If that's where you want me to go, I can.
Yeah, no, I just, before we do that, I just want to emphasize what you're saying. This is, I interact with so many different C-level executives in the course of a week or a month. And really, people in transition, it's really about the lack of alignment, particularly for the CMO role, as to why people are leaving. And it's so hard to clarify. I know at Spencer Stuart, you spend a lot of time up front with the CEO trying to force clarity. You know, you've got the 9-box matrix and there's 9 skills, pick 3 of them that the CMO can accomplish and really force that, but still a lot of turnover. And it really, I'll add a public service announcement for folks on the call. I interact with a lot of folks. I keep track of openings I hear about and keep people who are looking, and I enjoy making those connections. So feel free to reach out to me if anyone on the call here would like help with networking. But you know, as you think about these mid-level and junior marketers, and I know you handle across marketing, sales, and communications professions. So maybe think generally, what do you think folks in the earlier to mid part of their career should be thinking about to maximize their value, either within their current company so they can get promoted or be more desirable in the job market?
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably still answer this with a bit of a marketing lens on, if you don't mind, Roland. I mean, I
Sure,
think
absolutely.
You know, giving advice on how to manage a career, I mean, that's become a really hard question to answer. I mean, there used to be a somewhat standard path of success. I mean, 20 years ago, it was, you know, ideally go and get yourself hired by Procter & Gamble, Unilever, whatever it may be, go become a brand manager, run a P&L, and that was your sort of golden ticket onto other things. That is absolutely not the case anymore. There are, you know, and when I look at background and the roots up, it's very unconventional. I mean, we see many marketing leaders, some starting consulting firms now, others with agencies, other move over from, you know, from sales or other roles. That said, you know, I think right now there are rules of the road or things I think people can be thinking about. I mean, first of all, what I have become very concerned about, and this speaks to the point I was saying about just how broad the role has become, is I do try and encourage those early and mid-career to try and develop different skills. There is a risk that you grow up in a certain swim lane and you get typecast as a creative person, or, you know, and that's become a real challenge. I mean, how often do you see a creative director move to become a head of performance marketing? You just don't see that, or not within many companies. And so there's a real risk of getting stuck in a swim lane. And so the goal is, you know, how do you find either a boss or a company that is willing, or where you can challenge them to help you develop as many diverse skills as possible? Because I think marketing has become such a broad church of skills, and you will get to a point in your career where you need to bring that breadth and depth of skill set. So I'd say that's number one, around building a diverse set of marketing skills, or finding a place where that can happen. I'd still say it's most important to find a boss who will care about you and invest in you, and it's often worth following a good boss. I mean, if the statistics are true and your chief marketing officer is leaving every 3.5 years, you know, I think you want to keep in touch with that individual, particularly if you respect them and admire them and they're developing you. At the end of the day, though, if I was to try and put a bow on this around what's the overarching theme that I encourage people to think about, it's the 2 R's. It's relationships and reputation, because this is what you build up over your career, and it's really hard to course correct. I mean, think about the relationships that you have, how you conduct yourselves, you know, treat others as you would want to be treated. That will be remembered. I mean, frequently, how often do we have people that pop up from 10, 15 years ago? We haven't thought about them, but we remember them. That's the value of your reputation. And of course, I think we've all learned this, as we get older, it's no longer about just being the smartest person in the room. It's about who can inspire, who can motivate, who can lead a team. It's increasingly EQ over IQ. And even when I talk to senior leaders and I've asked them, so, you know, when you made a move, how did that come about? Even at a fairly senior level, most people I speak to find their next role through their existing network and relationships, and it's the strength of their reputation that gets them there. So that's what I encourage people to think about. Think about relationships, think about reputation. And look, I firmly believe good things happen to good people. I believe it is almost impossible now to plan a career out more than 3 or 5 years. I mean, I think it's actually frankly pointless to some extent. So focus on what you can control, do your best, perhaps let the chips fall as they may. I'm a sort of a big believer in fate, and things will happen for a reason. So I'm trying to end on a bit of an optimistic note.
I love that. That's of course we all applaud and stand up on that. But what I'm hearing you say is absolutely true. When the people that will take the appointment with a contact who may be in another company and think about networking, or use the ANA business marketing events to build their network, stay in touch with your former employer. I think those are really important strategies. Back when I was sort of in the seat, my schedule was so loaded up with meetings, I had no time for that. But I think now more than ever, and many of the people on this call I know are very active networkers and very successful CMOs on this call, and mid-career folks as well. It's challenging when you think about the marketing function, right? From, as you pointed out, maybe a very highly creative person who's adding tremendous value on the one hand, to a highly analytical person who's all about optimizing the online digital buy. And the CMO presumably is inheriting all of this. That job is even harder than the CEO job. They should be paid like CEOs, I think. But there's apparently a couple of them are making in the very high 8 digits, but not typical. Let's talk about the world of B2B marketing. This is after all, ANA's business marketing. I grew up in B2C marketing. I was at Clorox for 10 years. Great foundation, as you said, general manager, running your own show. It's all changed now. It's still a great place to be, but that's not the primrose path anymore. And then now in the last 20 years, I've probably done more B2B projects at AspireUp, probably 60% or 65% B2B. Seems to be a lot going on there. Is it as sexy as B2C? Would you say it's a good place to be for marketers in the B2B world?
Yes.
That's the answer.
Probably the answer you're expecting there, Roland. So no shock.
I was hoping you might say that. It could have gone badly if you didn't say that.
But let me give you a reason. So it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for change and transformation, B2B is the place where it's at right now. I mean, there is, I have seen in the 14, 15 years I've been doing this, there is more upgrade and evolution and change going on in what has historically been called B2B. I think, by the way, the lines between B2B and B2C are really quite blurred, by the way. But if we are going to still use those terms, there's more opportunity to drive change in B2B than there is right now, I believe, in B2C. I mean, fundamentally, the model is shifting from, how can marketing be perceived as, in some cases, I hate to say this, but a cost center to actually a revenue driver? How does the overall function shift from being a sales support to a sales enablement capability? We spoke a little bit about, I think, some of the challenges of the pandemic and what that has meant for businesses that have historically had significant field sales teams. The marketing function has more ability now to own the entire sales journey and the funnel than it's ever had before. This is why I think we called this whole session the golden era of marketing. I mean, it truly is, and even more so in B2B right now, providing that the CEO and the leadership team believes in the mission, that they support this. I've always felt, and I think it's very hard to drive cultural change from the bottoms up in a company. It's really got to come from the top down. You really have to have a board, a CEO, a leadership team that is willing to go on this journey. But if they are, the opportunities to drive change are much more powerful, much more significant right now in B2B, and this is where the action is.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. I'm sure most of the people on this call are B2B, although we do get, as you said, the lines are blurred. We have a lot of crossover. It is a sexy place to be, I believe you. I don't know if you have final words of wisdom before we go to the questions, or would you prefer we go to the questions? And any of you out there, I've been tracking the chat, and there's some great questions that you've been adding. We'll turn to those in a moment, but first give Richard, if you want to go right to the questions, we will, or do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, let's go there. I can see that I haven't been following the chat, but it looks like there's a lot going on there. So if you want to pick some topics, let's discuss them.
Yeah, so folks are saying, Kristen, I referenced her comment earlier, said cultures really aren't changing. Employers still seem to lack empathy. Joanne echoed and said, can we discuss the impact of working remotely on culture and where it's headed? Stakeholder interviews with a recent client revealed complete disconnect between team members. And are you seeing that, Richard? Are you seeing how are marketing functions dealing with that? And do you think there's a big gap there in terms of building connectedness?
Yeah, and this, well, look, I mean, fundamentally, this is a topic that goes, in my opinion, well beyond just marketing. I mean, this is related to a broader conversation about, what does return to office look like, and what does that mean for both recruitment, retention, when, look, many people don't, look, we're seeing different experiences. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think for younger generations, work is not just a professional function, it's actually a social function. And people want to be in an office, they want to meet people, they want to make friends, partners, spouses, whatever. For those at different points in their life, that has less value. And how do you stitch all this together? I mean, the biggest challenge we have right now is, particularly for the search work we're doing, Roland, is many of the folks we're talking to, many people that we're running as candidates, people don't want to move. People don't want to relocate. Labor mobility, people's willingness to move geographies, I've never seen it as low as it is right now. So on the one hand, we're dealing with, how do you keep cultures together? How do we bring people in? On the other hand, I'm dealing with people who say, I'm not moving. So if this company wants to employ me, then they better come up with a different solution. So, it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. And it's really tough. I mean, there's the cynic in me says, I am deeply worried about, what does culture even mean anymore in a Zoom world? Do we have company cultures? If so, what does it mean now? I'm not an expert on this topic, but it's a really fascinating subject. And maybe people here have an opinion. If anyone wants to come off mute and chime in, I would love to hear it, because it is a real challenge here around, and we're seeing huge inconsistency, by the way, across companies in terms of their approach of return to office.
Richard, it's Kristen. If I could step in for a second. So in 2017, I started my MBA with the University of Illinois, and they were basically the first big school to move to an online MBA program. So we adopted Zoom well before anyone did. There's a connection here to business. Mm-hmm. Everything we did, it was a global program, but our culture that we were able to create through Zoom, even though we were all, in our individual spaces, was so incredible because we were all there for the same reason. We did connect in unique ways, and we wanted to connect, right? So there was that desire to do that. I think in corporations, I don't think people view it as professional plus social, right? I especially the HR team. I think that we're there to get a job done, and that's it. And now Zoom has taught us you schedule that meeting, you get in and you out, you don't small talk, you don't do anything, right? So there's that approach I've seen where Zoom can bring people together in a connectedness way that you would never expect. And then yet in corporate, we haven't adopted that yet, because you're in and out, you don't have that water cooler talk, and people forget how to be social just because they're on Zoom. So it can exist, it's just, I don't think it's translated yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I'll be honest, I think I've been to my downtown Chicago office maybe 4 times in 2 years. The times I did go in, Kristen, I'm just doing exactly what I'm doing at home. There's no one else in the office. I'm just doing Zoom calls from my office downtown, and I might as well be at home. I mean, we're either all in or we're not. I mean, it's trying to find this middle ground, I think, is going to be, I don't know what the answer is. I think we're just going to explore different things for different people, and different ways of working. I mean, the nature of, for example, what I do, it's a much more sort of individual business. I'm not part of a large team of 20 creatives sitting in a room and brainstorming. But if you're a marketing agency, you do need that, and you do want that. So again, it'll depend on what type of work you're doing, what does it call for, and and how do you make this sort of hybrid model work? I don't know what the answer is. I really don't.
Another person on the chat spoke to the process of hiring through Zoom. I have a friend of mine who's a C-level who started a year ago at a fast-growing tech company. He's hired 20 people since then, never met any of them in person, all over the country, because he says they now say, preferred location is, in the headquarters, and this one is Bedford, Massachusetts. Preferred location is Massachusetts. Every single candidate says, I'm not moving, forget it. So he's had to hire 20, manager, director, and VP levels over the last year, never met any of them in person. Are you finding that the process of hiring can be as effective when assessing fit is such a key criteria for success?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I'll share with you what I'm seeing is happening, and then I think what I also need to be very honest about is this sort of the dirty little secret which people aren't talking about. So first of all, it was impressive how quickly we all adapted to the new normal of, okay, we're not going to be meeting people, and once we can get over that hurdle, we can still hire, we can still interview. What it actually meant is, at least as we witnessed from our clients, they actually wanted to see more candidates. The cost of interviewing was just another hour of their time. They weren't flying people in anymore, or doing things like that. And it was actually also a lot more efficient and effective, believe it or not. And so once people got over that initial hurdle of not meeting and it seeming weird, it was fine. We did see often in the closing stages of a search, particularly the senior roles, that we would find a creative way to have people go for a walk in the park or something. So we would still try and set up some meetings at the end. But the point you hit on, Roland, is critical, which is fit. I believe that there is a greater percentage of people not making it to their first year anniversary in new roles. People aren't talking about it as much, but I can sort of anecdotally see it in what's going on at Spencer Stuart and across our clients, that it is hard to judge fit and chemistry via Zoom. And we spoke about this sort of lack of mentoring development in a Zoom environment. These are real issues. And so even though we might now have at least perfected at least getting the recruitment done, whether that person sticks with the organization, I think there is a greater risk of mishires going on. And that's the bit that we're not talking about as much, because no one really wants to talk about that. But I believe that there is a greater error rate, whatever you want to call it, cropping up in hiring that's taking place, because it's 100% being conducted by Zoom.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And the flip side of the coin, another comment in the thank you, Vesna, for this comment. It's one that I've been dying to ask Richard about, is the one of job hopping. A lot of, I see a lot of resumes, and typically I see a lot of manager level, lower level people that are in their jobs for 9 to 18 months, and they've got 4 of them in a row like that. Obviously that's a little scary, but I know a lot of times junior folks end up in misaligned roles, and that's a function of either opportunism, because they find a better deal, or just misalignment forces them to leave. But also with senior folks, VP level folks that have been in their jobs 1 or 2 years. How do you view that as you conduct a search and you look at a bunch of resumes? How does someone get overcome that, let's say, if that's been their track record, and how do you and your employers view that?
Yep. So this is where we have to sort of perfect the art of storytelling, if you like, a little bit, Roland. I sometimes think of myself as less of a recruiter and more of a storyteller. And certainly when I'm talking to people about why they have made moves, I really want to understand the why. I want to understand, is there a consistency? Is there a coherence to the story that I'm hearing about why someone had made a move? I think particularly in the role of a search consultant, when our clients come to us, the reality is they're looking to make a risk-free hire. That's why they retain us, that's why they pay us. And look, it is somewhat problematic, if I may say, if someone is moving every 12 months, every 18 months, and that's been a pattern for 5, 6, 7 years, we are going to get asked a lot of questions by our clients, and we need to have the story down. So, sorry, I'm certainly not saying that anyone is disadvantaged in that process, but what I am saying is, when clients are working with us and what they're looking to get out of us in terms of this quote unquote risk-free hire, that is a story that we just have to understand a lot better. And I often, what I am very reluctant to do when I'm discussing profiles or candidates with clients, they often say, well, just send me the resumes and I'll pick 3 to interview. It's like, no, I will not do that. No, you need to hear the context from me around what is going on, why we're suggesting this individual, what they bring to the table. You need to hear the between the lines story. And I think, look, that's some of the value that we bring, and someone just needs to be aware of that. If someone who you don't know is seeing your resume for the first time, yeah, it's going to look a little bit weird if there's all these moves. But so it's thinking about, who are you working with, how well are you doing, you're telling your own story. And the irony is sometimes, marketers are not very good at marketing themselves, actually. Sad though it may sound.
Yeah, I guess it's very different if you joined a high growth company and you forced an exit and got a big buyout 2 times in a row after a year and a half versus the person who goes to the company and there was misalignment and they don't have a story behind that. It's just, it didn't work out and I had to move on.
Yeah, that's right. Look, if there's consistency and coherence to the story, my company got bought or we went public and, I could, sold all my equity. I get it. That makes sense. That happens, but you have to get the story.
Diane asked the question, is the issue of a quick exit a mishire or is it that we aren't building the personal bonds, one of the key elements that keep people within a company? And I butchered that, Diane, I'm sorry. So the question of a quick exit, what usually is going on there in your experience? How do employers avoid that? And then I guess the flip side is how would the person who's affected by that come back from a quick exit?
Right. Okay. So first of all, I just want to put it in context. This sort of concept I mentioned of a mishire. This is the very small minority of situations. I don't want to suggest that this is the majority or what's going on, but there's just a smaller incidence of those maybe, in my opinion, not making it past the first 12 months. And so Diane lays it out pretty well. So is it just something that was missed during the recruitment process because somehow we've shortcutted or couldn't observe it, or is there once they're in the door, are we not doing our job around retention? So in other words, you could think of it, is it a recruitment failure or is it a retention failure?
And I'll just add to that, Richard, to me, when I was thinking about the Zoom environment, we just are not building the personal bonds in that first year in a Zoom environment that you would build if you were in the office. And and my fear is that, some of those may be part of what keeps a good fit, makes a good fit.
Yep. Yeah. Look, the answer is both. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's both. I'm not sure I can handicap it necessarily one way or the other, but I think you've diagnosed, what the issue is. Is it a recruitment issue or is it a retention issue? And if we think it's one more than the other, how do we adjust our employee value proposition to address that? That's probably a somewhat unique company by company, case by case situation, but that's how I would break it down.
Yeah, Joanne, on that same theme, had a good point that with people working remotely, the barriers to leaving your company and moving on are pretty low. And also, if everything is Zoom-based, there's less opportunity for connections and loyalty building, let's say, as Diane was referencing, if you're not in person. So are you seeing companies now doing things to overcome that, to create more connectedness, bringing people into the office if they're remote on certain intervals or anything like that?
Yeah, we are. I mean, every company is doing it differently. Some are moving to sort of try and come in 3 days a week model, but other companies are doing it differently. I mean, here in Chicago, for example, I mean, if I have this correct, I understand, Allstate, for example, has just sold their huge campus up in Northfield. It's going to become an Amazon distribution center, I understand.
Yeah.
The concept of a head office doesn't even exist. And so if there's anyone here on the phone from Allstate or on the line from Allstate, please correct me. But my understanding, they don't have the concept of a head office anymore. I think they're going to have hubs and pods, and I'm sure someone can correct me. That may be one extreme. There are others. I've been doing work for a very large, well-known company down in Dallas, and they're absolutely insisting 5 days a week back in the office. It's go time, people, come back. This is it. If you want to work here, this is what you've got to do. So you've got these wild extremes, and even within the same industry, it can be very different. I mean, my conclusion on this is it feels it's actually kind of down to the whim of an individual CEO and what he or she wants. That's the only consistency I can actually find behind this. Someone has to make a call ultimately about how we're going to work together and what are we going to do about it. And we're seeing CEOs make very, very different decisions on what a culture or even the concept of an office, assuming they even have one in the state of Allstate, is going to look like anymore. It's all over the place.
A couple of key takeaways, and I'll ask Dakota in a moment to summarize the upcoming events. One, guard your relationships and your reputation very closely. Seek to get broadening experiences within your company or as you move companies to round out your value as a future senior hire. And what else? Anything else you would add to that?
I mean, chin up. I think, good days are ahead. I think, what I've always loved about the United States is such an optimistic, innovative, can-do kind of culture. It's funny, I was sort of actually back in Europe. I was in France of all places last week, and you just sense this. We sometimes forget how good we have it in the United States. This is where the action is. This is where the place is. This is where the dynamism is. Like, go USA, okay? And so, we sometimes lose a little bit of relativity. We're all doing great, I hope, and the world will go on.
Yeah. Well, they certainly know how to stay healthy with some good red wine over in France. So you picked up some tips over there, I'm sure. Thank you, everyone. I'll turn it over to Dakota to summarize some upcoming events.
Yeah, big virtual round of applause to you both. And really, I want to say to everybody, I know there's a lot of people that have been to a lot of these events of ours, and my observation is this is one of the most engaged kind of back and forth chat sessions that we've had too. So I think that not only speaks to the urgency and relevancy of the topic, but also the tremendous insights and expertise that both of you kind of brought to leading that discussion. So thank you for all of that. Certainly with regards to the importance of networking and building relationships, don't forget about taco and beer and marketing, April 20th. Join us at Cruz Blanca Brewery. And I also was remiss not to mention earlier a bit of breaking news on our end. Some of you may be familiar with it, but we have, the chapter has a strategic alliance with B2B marketing out of the UK. My good friend Bill Furlong is here with us today. And we are putting together a special discount for their upcoming Ignite Summit that is happening right here in Chicago. It is on June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, if I'm correct, at the Renaissance, yes. I believe. Yes. Check out their website. It's a tremendous lineup of speakers and experts, a lot of focus on brand, which is some of what we were talking about today. It is b2bigniteusa.com. There'll be a 20% discount for our members. So message me, LinkedIn, email, and I will get you that promo code. But we're going to be excited to share that with our entire community. So good things coming for all of us and more in-person events in that regard. So thank you again to everybody and have a fantastic and productive week.